Hi, this is Mark Lou Carrier welcoming you to another episode of Fakes, Frauds, and Phonies and the continuing adventures of the dubious Vermeers and the man who made them. Now, Goering, the morphine-addicted leader of Adolf Hitler's Luftwaffe, dispatched agents to scour the museums of Europe for art, even trying to beat Hitler at grabbing the best goodies. One of his agents was art dealer Walter Andreas Hofer, who spent a good deal of time traveling the continent to purchase pieces for Goering. And when the piece was too high or money not enough of an enticement to part with the piece, offered negotiated ownership at the point of a gun, an argument that generally won out. It's no surprise that he obtained a large quantity of priceless art at bargain prices. Kajetan Muhlmann was another of Goering's notorious agents. Muhlmann, formerly commissioner of Austrian art, headed the Special Commission for the Protection of Works of Art in occupied Europe. This protection mostly took the form of looting the best pieces for Hitler and Goering, quickly shipping off so-called degenerate art, entwertete Kunst in German, art considered Jewish or Bolshevistic or otherwise not acceptable to the higher race, to neutral countries like Switzerland, where it was either auctioned off for cash or exchanged for acceptable art. Goering covered the walls of Marienhall, his garish mansion just north of Berlin, with purchased or looted works. And that was only one of 8 mansions, each of which was packed to the rafters with art. Goering was as eclectic as he was rapacious, with a collection covering everything from Roman artifacts to 19th century German paintings. Everything but degenerate art, of course. He filled the rooms of his vulgar castle, named after his late wife, a Swedish aristocrat, with jewelry, objets d'art, carpets, and tapestries. And he is said to have felt nothing to be more relaxing than plunging his hands into a bowl of diamonds. He also had a proclivity for female nudes, both in the flesh and on canvas, and he collected both in orgiastic quantities. Between 1939 and 1945, Goering acquired approximately 1,375 paintings, 250 sculptures, and 168 of the world's most expensive tapestries for an estimated total of over 100 million Reichsmarks, about $40 million in the U.S. dollars of the time. His collection included pieces like Cranach's Venus and Cupid, Rembrandt's Two Philosophers, as well as several Vermeers, of which many turned out to be fake. One of them was a newly discovered Vermeer that Bredius, the expert, had happily authenticated. So, where were all those new Vermeers coming from? Well, probably guessed it by now. They were coming from the studio of a Dutch artist called Han van Meegeren. Han van Meegeren, born in 1889, passed away in 1947, was a classic failed artist. After a short taste of local fame, his talents and inspirations flared out. His only lasting contribution to the world of art, aside from his notorious forgeries, was a depiction of a mournful doe, often referred to as Queen Juliana's deer, and which graces Dutch Christmas cards to this day. Van Meegeren was born in the Dutch town of Deventer. He showed an early talent for drawing, but his rather despotic father disapproved of art as a career, and Van Meegeren had to pursue his passion in secret. Van Meegeren Sr. saw the art world as populated with shiftless bohemians living in unheated lofts, drinking wine and having sex with loose women, a fate worse than death, apparently. He duly decided that his son and heir would study architecture. In 1911, Van Meegeren married Anna de Voogd, and having secretly neglected his architectural studies for art instruction, the irrepressible drawings of the deer struggling to emerge, he won first prize and a gold medal from the General Sciences section of the Delft Institute of Technology. His talent had finally been recognized. Anna and Han moved to The Hague, where he finally got his degree in art. In the years that followed, Van Meegeren supported himself and his wife by giving drawing lessons, while he painted nights and weekends. He held 2 exhibitions, one in 1916 and the other in 1922. His work was well received, but without much fanfare. In 1923, he divorced Anna and took up with Johanna Hermans, the wife of art critic Karl de Boer. Revenge for a bad review? I don't know. They were married in 1929. Van Meegeren's style was as conservative as his politics. Narrowly parochial in his worldview, he saw life through the lens of ultra-traditional Catholicism and virulent anti-Semitism. His work included unimaginative interiors of old churches, extremely ordinary scenes of the countryside, religious paintings, and sickly sweet sentimental portraits. Slimy little group of women haters and Negro lovers is how Van Meegeren described the artist foisting modern art on the world. Exciting innovations in form and facture inevitably overshadowed this dusty and crippling conservatism. In the 1920s, critics began looking upon him as a quaint, vaguely amusing relic of times past, an artistic fossil, if you will. It was not a role he cherished. He became bitter and angry and vowed revenge on the art world. He'd show them for the fools they were, he promised himself. In 1923, Van Meegeren produced his first forgery, a Laughing Cavalier, authenticated by an expert as a genuine work by Frans Hals. It sold at auction for a respectable sum, and although it was soon spotted as a fake, Van Meegeren managed to conceal his involvement in the treachery. But the adventure served as a good apprenticeship, and many of the tricks he learned served him well in the fabrication of his first Vermeer, Lady and Gentleman at the Spinet, hailed as a fine example of the master's work by Abraham Bradius. His coffers replenished with fresh ill-gotten gains, Van Meegeren moved to the south of France, where he ostensibly supported himself, painting portraits. But this was just a front, developing awesomely clever tricks of forgery, some of them unmatched to this day, took up most of his time. Much of Van Meegeren's success as a forger was due to his cunning and ingenuity, but he effectively combined these with a great capacity for very hard work, assiduously working on the study of formulae for 17th century pigments and burning the midnight oil experimenting with methods of producing color layers with the hardness of old paint and a convincing network of craquelures, the tiny hairline cracks covering most old paintings. The hard work paid off. In 1936, he painted his signature Vermeer forgery, The Disciples at Emmaus. It was a painting designed specifically to fit Bradius's postulate, a religious theme redolent of influence by Caravaggio. And Bradius gave the work his immediate blessing. Van Meegeren, quite skilled at keeping a safe distance between himself and his forgeries, enlisted the help of a former Dutch parliamentarian to bring the painting to Bradius. As hard as it is to believe, he felt that a politician would be more credible, and that no one would dare doubt the honesty of a member of Parliament. Different times, different mores. The provenance of this yet unknown Vermeer will sound familiar. The painting had been in an Italian family for generations, and now, having fallen on hard times, they wanted to dispose of it quickly, but guess what? They asked to remain anonymous. It just screams of forgery. Bradius did not just like this painting, he absolutely adored it and championed its authenticity in every quarter. In a 1937 issue of the Burlington magazine, the British arts periodical, founded in 1903, he wrote, "We have here, I am inclined to say, the masterpiece of Johannes Vermeer of Delft. Quite different from his other paintings, and yet every inch of Vermeer. In no other picture by the great master of Delft do we find such sentiment, such a profound understanding of the Bible story, a sentiment so nobly expressed through the medium of the highest art." Many disagreed with Bradius and saw the painting for what it was, a rather crude forgery. But he was the ultimate authority, and on his say-so, Rotterdam's Boymans Museum purchased it for a huge sum of money, the current equivalent of almost $3 million American dollars. Van Meegeren pocketed the equivalent of almost $1.5 million. He was on Easy Street, but he was also on drugs and alcohol, and this addiction to morphine and gin resulted in a change of plans. His original intention, or so he claimed, was to come out and confess that he'd forged a Vermeer to embarrass the pretentious prigs of the art world, the very same ones who'd scoffed at his talent. But now he had a monkey on his back, and Vermeer was going to feed it. Despite Van Meegeren's weaknesses, one can't help admiring his dogged determination and his capacity for hours and hours of hard work, or help wondering if he would have gained recognition as an artist in his own right if he'd been as assiduous about experimenting with and evolving his own style. In any event, he showed an uncanny ability to identify a problem and work systematically towards a solution. Setting out to create forgeries, Van Meegeren never gave a second thought to the quality of his style, convinced as he was that he had the talent of Vermeer or the Hug. Effectively combining dogged determination with a vast knowledge base, he set greater store in his extensive expertise in chemistry and restoration. The techniques of restoration often cross over into the skills needed to commit impassable forgeries. This is not to suggest that all restorers are forgers, but rather that many forgers are also restorers. They are conversant with the basic techniques of that trade, at the very least. Thus, Van Meegeren set out to create a forgery that would stand up to the closest scientific scrutiny. First, there was an excellent shortcut he could take, a trick, as we'll see, that comes up repeatedly. He scoured flea markets and antique shops, searching out genuine 17th century Dutch paintings, which is not as difficult or expensive as one might think. A form of painting madness spread like wildfire through 17th century Netherlands, and almost everyone set out to paint. A proficiency in drawing was central to even the most basic education, along with reading and writing. It often seems that half the population of the time was painting, while the other half was purchasing art, and buying paintings was far from being the preserve of the rich. Bookstores and market stalls commonly sold paintings of every size, quality, and price. Every Sunday, most church squares hosted large art markets, many of the sellers featuring cheap knockoffs of paintings by famous artists. These were purchased by people of humble means. Tax records of 17th century Holland carried entries like plumber and roof slater Cornelius van Koolhoorn left 26 paintings. Or a confectioner by trade bequeaths 20 paintings. Again, hosiery dyer Tobias Moyart leaves a collection of 64 paintings. This mass-produced Dutch art is still available in European and North American shops and galleries. Anything from a few $100s to a few thousand will buy you a passable and genuine 17th century painting. That's a small investment indeed if one's ultimate purpose is transforming the work into a forgery that can sell for millions, as the works offer obvious advantages to the clever forger. The canvas weave is genuine and of the period, as is the wood frame and the sizing, the initial white coat on the canvas, sometimes referred to as gesso. If you're lucky, even the nails are original. All the forger needs to do is remove the color layer, or painting if you prefer, and commit his forgery on top of the gesso. But that sounds deceptively easy. Consider what Van Meegeren did with his cheap 17th century paintings. He very carefully worked away at the color layer with a pumice stone, using nothing more than a bit of soap and water, a process that can take days of tedious work, even with a small painting. His aim was not only to promote the pigment layer, but to do so while retaining the backing in pristine condition. We'll see later how important this was. Hours of extraordinary concentration were required to apply the right pressure, sufficient to flake off the paint, yet not enough to damage what lay beneath it. And that was the easy part. The tough bits were still ahead. Van Meegeren sought out pigments that had to be consistent with Vermeer's period. That does not mean that they had to be pigments specific to 17th century Holland. A huge palette of color had been available to artists for many centuries, as long ago as ancient Egypt, in fact. Consistency with Vermeer's period meant avoiding colors that were not available to Vermeer and his contemporaries. Another thing Van Meegeren knew about pigments was that they had to be hand-ground to provide a consistent appearance under the microscope. Differences between period and contemporary grinds would immediately jump out at an experienced examiner. If all Van Meegeren wanted was money, it might have been far easier to rob a bank. And we've not yet considered how he tackled his toughest problem. The single most difficult challenge facing most forgers is to create an oil paint that dries and hardens quickly. Ordinary oil paint gives the illusion of being dry after a few days. It feels dry to the touch and will not smudge if you rub it. But in fact, it can take more than 12 years for it to dry completely and up to 60 years for its entire oil-based medium to evaporate. Van Meegeren not only needed paint that was consistent with the 17th century, but it also had to dry and harden extremely fast. After much experimentation, he settled on a combination of special medium and heat, knocking together a purpose-built oven that could accommodate canvases up to 115 centimeters by 127 centimeters, without the need to fold or compress them in any way. He began trials that led to a series of disasters, using books on the techniques and materials of artists in Vermeer's period, including one by A.M. the Wild, who later recommended the purchase of one of Van Meegeren's Vermeers, staking his reputation on its authenticity. Van Meegeren found that conventional oil media dried quickly, but often came out of his oven severely damaged, horribly burnt, and blistered in spots. Some of his test paintings even caught fire. He understood the need to replace the fat-based oils with more volatile products, and he began experimenting with lavender and lilac oil. But the results proved unsatisfactory, despite a distinctive improvement in the painting's odor. Van Meegeren, as always, was undaunted, plunging deeper into contemporary chemistry to find an answer in recent developments. And that is exactly what happened when he stumbled on an academic paper about a new product called Bakelite, which industrial designers had just started using for the manufacture of telephones, radio, kitchen products, and so on. A precursor of plastic, the resilient product is a mixture of principally phenol and formaldehyde, the two chemical compounds that Van Meegeren identified as the drying and hardening agents he needed. Van Meegeren immediately began experimenting with the compounds, sometimes inconclusively, sometimes with limited success. Soon enough, however, he discovered the right recipe for what he badly needed: quick drying and quick hardening paint. What was the exact formula? There are widely differing views on its precise composition. The most credible version is the one put forward by his son, Jacques, himself a painter. He granted an interview in the late 60s with Lord Kilbracken for the later's book, Case History, Van Meegeren. Speaking of the father's formula, Kilbracken writes, he would make up his paints by incorporating the required pigments in oil of lilac and have these ready on his palette. He would prepare separately the correct solution of resin. Then, with each stroke, he would dip his brush in the phenolic solution before taking up the prepared paint from his palette and applying it to the canvas. But what about scientific testing? The phenol should jump out as not of the right epoch, but there's no evidence that any of Van Meegeren's forgeries were even subjected to applications of chemical expertise. In any case, most of the chemical would have evaporated by the time such testing took place, and most importantly, there would have been no testing for this specific chemical unless its presence was suspected, which is highly unlikely. And then there was the craquelure, the cherry on the sundae. And I hate to do this to you, but we're going to look at how he managed to make credible craquelure, those little cracks in the painting, fooled even the greatest experts. So that's next time. Well, that's it for this episode of Fakes, Frauds, and Phonies. Please subscribe, and if you're a victim of art fraud, please write to me. My email is fakesandfrauds, all in one word, at writeme, WRITEME.com. In closing, please note that a illustrated print version of Fakes, Frauds, and Phonies is available at Amazon worldwide in Kindle or paperback format. So this is your host, Mark Luke Carrier, saying bye-bye for now.